Hello everyone, I'm Cheese. I hope you're all doing fantastic today. And well, I watched the first 3 episodes of Harem in the Labyrinth of Another World, and yeah. I mentioned this anime in the video about the summer 2022 anime, as this one had caught my attention for all the wrong reasons. And as a result, this video ended a bit ranty, so fair warning. In all honesty, the sheer amount of mediocrity is staggering. It's almost as if the creators realized just how dodgy the premise is and ended up making the 9th million iteration of the same isekai template, but with some added titties this time. I mean, even the main character looks like every other isekai protagonist, but let's talk about the show in a little bit more detail. The premise is, well, all sorts of wrong, and I'm not just saying that to claim some moral high ground. I mean, I am, but that's not the point. Now, harems as they are, I don't usually mind, but when you introduce slavery for the purpose of physical relations as a means to form that harem, things get really questionable. And no, it doesn't really make it any better if the girls are okay with it. Now that I've gotten that out of my system, along with the fact that this is really the bad kind of incel dream as a world, we can have a closer look at what the anime actually has in store for the viewer. As I already mentioned, the show is at its core really just another isekai following that same old template as all of them seem to do, but this time it has some pretty raunchy, ecchi scenes. An unpopular NEETs gets isekai'd into a game world of sword and fantasy, fights off some bandits after it realizing he cannot leave the game, and then proceeds to learn that slavery is a thing in the world, and that some of those slaves are used for pleasure rather than work, so naturally he sets to own some. But generic isekai protagonist number 7344 is in dire need of some cash in order to buy himself a piece of dat ass. But alas, he only has 5 days to purchase the one girl he has set his eyes on. The anime tries really hard to convince the viewer that all of this is somehow okay. The girl in question, Roxanne, is fine with being a slave to please her master, just saying that feels wrong. And the main character even reasons that he could treat the slave girls well while some others might not, and that they will be bought anyway. But again, it doesn't make the concept any more acceptable. But enough ranting about the premise, let's try to look past all of that and have a look at the story, characters and identity of the show and figure out if there's actually any kind of a saving grace for this mess. The only character we've really gotten to know thus far is the main one, Michio Kaga, and there really isn't much to say about him. He's exactly what you'd expect from an isekai protagonist, nothing more and nothing less. Though I will give them that this time his powers sort of make sense. He is the main character in a game, and is thus given an option to choose himself a powerful weapon, which happens to be a sword. And not only that, it kind of makes sense that he knows how to use a sword, as it's mentioned that he's done kendo in the past, so props for that. The story too is very much standard isekai mediocrity. I've explained most of it already, and on top of that there is a labyrinth, which, let's face it, it's just another word for dungeon, which again is one of those tired old isekai tropes. I'm assuming the labyrinth will play a bigger role in the future, at least looking at the name of the anime, but at least thus far it's only been a way for Michio to make some money in order to acquire Roxanne. As a whole, the anime seems to be a bit of a mess that doesn't really know what it wants to do and what it wants to be. There are lots of elements, none of which really go all the way to establishing the identity of the whole damn thing. There is dungeon adventuring, some brutal murder with some exceedingly violent scenes, with the existential crisis of what it means to kill people, and let's face it, some pretty juicy ecchi scenes, none of which I naturally can show here because YouTube and all that. The adventuring really is only there for 1 episode, at least so far, and it even establishes some base rules for the magic system, the dungeon, and the world around Michio, and the show is heading up to be a relatively well-established dungeoneering one. And then it's all forgotten as Michio decides to try his hand at bounty hunting, and all of a sudden the anime dives into the dark world of manslaughter and assassination with blood and surprisingly well-detailed scenes of what can only be classed as murder. Michio even suffers with the psychological consequences of taking a life, only for the next morning to dawn and all is forgotten, because that makes sense. And then there are the ecchi scenes, of which there are surprisingly few to be honest. The first episode gave us a bit of that and established that the quality of them is along the lines of the likes of Interspecies reviews, but unlike that show, this one doesn't embrace this aspect either, but instead just shows a scene or two here and there. It's almost as if they know that the story alone is not enough to keep anyone watching and they need to show some titty to keep people interested. I will say, however, there have been a few booty scenes as well, and this time us booty-loving guys have not been forgotten, which is very often the case with anime. But yeah, at least so far, the slave harem in Other World's Labyrinth is a hot mess with no real identity to speak of, an anime that falls in the usual isekai trap of trying to incorporate too much without embracing anything and riding with that. The old mantra of less is more really applies here, so make of that what you will. Still, remember, this is just my first impressions based on the first 3 episodes, and the show might still make something of itself as more episodes are released. All in all, the show is perfectly mid. It's enjoyable if you can look past the uncomfortable premise, however, I wouldn't go expecting sky-shattering results from it anytime soon. But before I go, if you like this video, please like it, and if you're new here, why not subscribe? It's a very small channel and I'm still trying to grow it and trying to find my identity here on YouTube. That being said, if you have any comments or feedback or anything you'd like to see me do in the future, comment so down below, and I hope to see you guys next time with more anime goodness. With that, I have been Cheese, and ta-ta for now.